Hey there, Megan Avery from Hipstitch Academy here. Today I'm going to tell you about a simple, unexpected thing I did that changed my sewing business instantly. It was the day I started teaching mobile sewing classes, and that was the day my sewing business started to grow dramatically. Up until that point, I'd only been teaching sewing classes in my sewing studio. I was totally in love with my studio in Hoboken, and I had so much pride in where we held our sewing classes every day. The studio was equipped with everything we could possibly ever need to teach a sewing class. It had giant cutting tables, tons of sewing machines, all the tools and notions organized so I could easily find them. We were doing pretty well at the time, or so I thought. We held our sewing classes almost every possible time we could during the day, but if you think about it, there are only so many teachable class hours in each day. So if you're teaching both adult and kids sewing classes like we do, typically you can schedule sewing classes 1 after school, 2 in the evenings, and 3 on the weekends, but that's really about it. And if and when you max out on the number of students you can teach at these times of day in your studio space, your ability to grow and scale your business beyond this point can become very challenging. That's when I thought we need to be in more than one place at a time. But even though making this happen sounded doable, it also sounded like a huge pain in the butt. My first thoughts were, how am I going to get this started? Where am I going to hold these classes? And how am I going to lug these sewing machines and all the other sewing stuff around? Oh, and I almost forgot. Who's going to teach these classes if I'm already teaching at my studio? And yeah, these are super valid questions that you may have thought of as well. But after I gave it some thought, the process became a lot easier. If you're thinking of starting to do some mobile sewing classes, remember 2 simple but important things. Start small and start simple. For us in our business, it was that after school time, like between 3:30 and 5:30, that was the busiest for us. And therefore, that is when it made the most sense to start teaching mobile sewing classes. We knew that if we held some classes where large groups of kids tend to already be at that time of day, we'd have no problem filling the classes at this location as well. So the obvious next step was working directly with the schools in our area to teach classes right on the school premises. The beauty of this is that kids didn't have to get from our school or from their school to our studio, eliminating this step for their parents and their caregivers. And the kids that had to stay at school until their parents could pick them up after work were a whole new group of kids who probably had an interest in learning how to sew, but hadn't taken our classes before because they didn't have the ability to get to the studio after school. Writing this now, it all seems so simple, but at the time it was a lot to wrap my head around. I can imagine it might be for you as well. So I'm going to break the process down into 5 simple steps that'll probably work if you are looking to get started teaching mobile sewing classes to kids or even to adults. It'll work for both. And if you haven't started teaching yet, that's okay too. This is helpful because maybe this is the push you need to get it started before you have the expense of having your own sewing studio. So here they are, 5 simple steps for getting started teaching mobile sewing classes. 1. Any room can be a sewing studio, at least temporarily. We've taught sewing in church basements, museums, pre-K classrooms, libraries, art studios, cafes, restaurants, people's dining rooms, camp cabins, outdoors, and so many other crazy places. You can turn just about any space into a sewing studio as long as you have the right tools with you. And B, as long as you have access to power. And B is actually negotiable because you could teach hand sewing or embroidery and then you don't need power at all. Okay, 2, make sure you establish ongoing relationships and more classes are definitely gonna follow. I'm very proud that we always get asked back wherever we teach outside of our studio. And I feel it's very important to continue the relationship with the organization where you're teaching. We all know that we have to be friendly and courteous, obviously, when you're there using their space, but don't forget to follow up after the class to let them know how much you loved teaching there It's so important to follow up and keep in touch with them. If your class goes well, they're going to want to ask you back as much as you're going to want to teach there again. 3, pack light and be totally efficient. The list of supplies you need for a mobile sewing class is actually surprisingly shorter than you might think. I use this awesome cart that I have. I lug all the sewing machines around on it. I can fit 6 machines on it if I bring all 6 to the class. And then I can fit all the other supplies into a large shopping tote that I sling over my shoulder while I steer my cart. We've got a checklist of all the things that we use in our sewing classes in this post, so check that out. You can just download it. It's a PDF, and then you make sure that you don't forget anything. Okay, number 4, hire rock stars who are going to represent your business as well, if not better, than you. When I hire teachers, I'm more concerned with their experience teaching than how great a seamstress they are. If it's most likely not going to be an advanced sewing class, and how your teacher handles a group of adults or kids in the classroom is more important than how long they've been sewing themselves or how skilled a tailor they are. Number 5, try your darndest to keep the experience as close to the one they'll have at the studio. Make sure there's plenty of table space wherever you're doing it. Make sure people can spread out, and make sure there's a really comfortable area to set up the sewing machines that you can plug a plug strip in so you can plug all your sewing machines in. And turn that space as much into what your sewing studio would look like or does look like as you possibly can. I mean, you are sometimes limited based on where you are, but you can do things to make the sewing studio experience